Hi, Felicia, Sheila.
Test,
Hi, it's
test,
Sheila.
test, test. Hello, how are you? Uh, oh, geez.
is 6 p.m. on Monday, August 17th already. This meeting is being recorded by the Community Relations and Education Committee. If any other person present are doing the same, please notify the chairperson at this time, with the exception of GCTV. We know that they're recording. Is there anyone else? All right, so I don't see anyone, so I'm moving on to a roll call vote. I see that we have Councilors Hirschfield, Jarvis, and Mayo. Should we have Councilor Ricketts?
I don't see her signed on.
All right. So in that case, do I have a motion to approve the minutes from June 15th, 2020?
So moved, Jarvis.
I have a second?
Second.
Second, Mayo.
All right. Moved by Jarvis, seconded by Mayo. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So it looks like everybody is doing a pretty good job of this so far, but just as a housekeeping item, I would like to remind people, if you're not speaking, please put yourself on mute. I know that in the clerk's office, they were having a hard time recording minutes because background noise interferes, and it's not, it's everybody. So with that, I'm ready to move on into the public comment portion of this meeting. If anybody wants to make a public comment, please use the chat tool, put in your name and your address. I imagine we're all Greenfield residents, but Greenfield residents will get first dibs. And then after that, if there's anyone outside of Greenfield, if it doesn't look like we have a lot of people logged in, so we can keep this pretty informal if people want to have more of a dialogue and more of a back and forth. But any comment, I would welcome people starting now. I've got my chat open, I can see. Okay, I see Susan Wargaftic, and I know you're on Forest Street, but you have to remind me your number.
45.
45.
45 Forest Avenue. Yeah, I would just like to speak. This is going to be something that's probably going to bridge a couple of different committees over time, but I'm working with Greenfield Racial Justice, and we are now in the process of going through police records, all of the incident files, to be able to understand exactly what the police are doing day by day, and looking at those things in terms not of good and bad. That's not where we are. What we're talking about is what services do we need and who's providing them. And I just want to let this committee know, because we're looking, the preliminary that we've seen so far says that there are a lot of services that are being provided by the police that probably should be provided by someone who doesn't have a gun on his or her hip and is looking at social services. And as this is the committee where that would play a part, we wanted to let you know that we hope within the next couple of months to be able to come to you with data that says these are the kinds of services the police are providing. And we want to look at the possibility of changing the dynamic of what police provide as police and what we provide as public services to the community. Thank you. You're muted.
I did the thing that I make fun of everyone else for doing. All right, is there anybody else who would like to provide comment during the public comment portion of this meeting? I think we can keep this pretty informal, but if you want to be recognized, please use the chat window just so that I know that you're there. I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about law enforcement a little bit later in the agenda, so maybe that'd be a good time to have more of a back and forth. And now I gotta look at my other screen so I can see what's next on our agenda. So next, I have communications from the school department. It looks like we have Superintendent Harper on the line.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Ah, lovely. Good evening, everyone. I'll be pretty brief. There's been a lot of press and public information about the schools and school reopening lately. I do have a local rainstorm passing. If it's hard to hear, let me know. We have had a vote of the school committee last Wednesday evening for a reopening that is in the remote and remote plus model. What this means is that instruction for the fall will be primarily remote. However, we are prioritizing students for in-person services who are, according to the Department of Education criteria for being prioritized for in-person, including special education, English learners, and additional other students. That's under the remote portion. And then we've also proposed phasing in additional services that are in person that really help to connect students and their teachers in ways that are safe, but we think more engaging and bring them out from behind a screen. So those need to be bargained with the teachers union. That process is initiated and underway, but hasn't completed. We're all optimistic that we'll have an agreement that makes sense for everybody well before school starts. But that is a required component of ensuring those are done. We will be distributing Chromebooks. There are tents that are going up. I'd like to thank the DPW and the rec department for their help. We have rented very large tents that allow outdoor instructional space and meetings, face-to-face meetings. For example, even if you are working fully remotely, we believe that students should be able to meet their teacher in person whenever possible. So we'll be offering in-person meetings with teachers and students before the remote learning portion starts. And we want to use these outdoor spaces as much as possible. So we have our tech department and the city's IT folks and DPW folks are putting Wi-Fi up in the tents, power to the tents, and we're really trying to make these accessible outdoor spaces as much as possible because we know ventilation is so important to helping ensure that there's good circulation and ventilation for everyone. So we're maximizing outdoor spaces. And those are some of the ways that we are beginning the year while we continue assessments of the HVAC systems and some of the other important elements, as we are still, we have low transmission rates right now in Franklin County, and we have positive data, which is very important, but we're still doing our part to lower transmission risks and keep everybody safe to the extent that we can. So we're really focused on delivering a high quality product in the remote learning and making that really strong, building on the feedback that we got last spring. So there's a lot happening. It'll look like a different kind of a school year, but it will look like the start of a school year. And we are, we're happy to be in the implementation phase. We've been building all these plans. It's good to have a vote of the committee to say, this is the direction we want you to go. And now we are focused on implementing.
All right. Counselor Jarvis has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I missed it from the superintendent or not. I got cut off and I had to log back on real quick, so I don't know if I missed it. Just a question. I saw that Comcast was offering a service to people for internet, and it had to be run by a nonprofit, and you had to have 25, at least 25 participants in it to do. I was just wondering if it was something the school was going to be doing, because if so, then I would, I personally would make sure that I paid enough so a student would have the internet for a year.
That's a great question, Counselor. Thank you. I received an update from Comcast this afternoon from our rep about their Internet Essentials program. I'm not sure if that's the program you're referring to, but they're in communication with our tech director as of today. They made some changes to that program, and we're in communication. And so that's one way that we can help families make sure they have access. We've also expanded our partnership with GCET around their equity program. And so they're extending free internet service to qualifying families as long as we are in a remote or remote plus offering. And then, as I said earlier, we're also building outdoor Wi-Fi access points in the tents, so that while the fall has, good weather and we can enjoy the out of doors, we'd like to make that as a public access point where folks can come and actually get on Wi-Fi that has the security of the school system as well. So several ways that we are trying to make sure that lack of access to the internet is not a barrier for our students.
Yeah, very good. That was my concern, that the people that GSAT couldn't get to, that Comcast probably could. So, like I said, I know there's at least a half a dozen people up here in my precinct all said that they would donate enough money to keep a student on the internet for the year if need be. So,
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I would actually ask my tech director if there's a way we can structure that. There are a small number of families who fall outside of a particular service range who have inquired about hotspots. And so I'll see if we can make that possible. Thank you.
nice. Just let us know and I'll spread the word.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
All right, next, Counselor Mayo would like to be recognized.
Superintendent Harper, I have a question for you. You mentioned that you definitely have a setup for special needs people to meet more time with them with their instructor. When you're meeting outside, does that mean that people meeting inside the tent would be compliant with ADA requirements?
That's a very good question. So let me back up a little bit and say there's a range of different learners that it might be appropriate to meet in person for. And we sort of think of them as being special education, but it might not just be that. It could also be students who are experiencing homelessness. It could be a range of students who don't have access to English proficiency in the home. There's not an adult that's able to support them remote learning. And there's a list from the Department of Education that helps us prioritize that. We're working with Mark Snow, the inspector, DPW, and the rec department to set up the tables in a way that's accessible. And I would simply say that it's an additional offering. So, for example, some of them are on blacktop, Doug, and yet others, if they're not in an ideal situation, it won't be the only way that we can provide services. So if it is not, it's a really important point. And if it's not suitable for any number of reasons, then we'd look at an alternate location. We're also doing small individual pop-up tents for more counseling type services, for more privacy that can be set apart. And then the model we've used over the summer that's worked really well are actually in-home services. So for our special education summer school, staff have actually gone to a small number of students' homes and provided services right in their home or on their porch in a location that's comfortable and accessible to them.
Okay.
Point noted, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Norm, are you trying to be recognized? Norm, you're on mute.
Yes, okay. What's going to happen when it gets cold out this fall? I really like the idea of tents, but
You live in New England?
yeah, what's going to happen when it gets cold? And the other question I have is when both parents are working and the student is at home, who checks up on the student, whether they're working on their Chromebook or just watching TV?
Okay, so a lot of questions there. First, we'll start with New England weather. So you've aptly pointed out that doesn't work in the middle of a blizzard. These tents are planned to be up through about Thanksgiving time. I don't know if you all remember a couple of years ago, we had that Halloween storm and we lost power and around about the end of October. So we think planning through the end of November as an outdoor use of that space is optimistic but reasonable for New England. And what we're doing during this time, Counselor, is we're completing HVAC assessments on the inside spaces. We're making changes to the air circulation and exchange. We're installing filters where necessary. But we were working with the city to do that, but we actually have to hire outside commissioning agents that have the appropriate credentials. And that process is underway, but takes some time. So in the period of time between now and the end of November, we expect that we'll have very good progress, if not completion, on all of those assessments. And as soon as those adjustments are made, once those spaces are available and safe to use, there's no problem bringing students into those spaces, especially if you're circulating the air in a way that's compliant, you're increasing fresh intake and so forth. So a lot of what we're doing is making use of, good old-fashioned Mother Nature when we can, and then being smart about using that time to get a jump start on what it's going to be like when it's colder. So that's the first part. Second was about how do you know they're not just watching TV? So in this spring, we had, sort of, wow, everything has changed in our world. Everything's upside down. We're in a bit of emergency mode, and our teachers jumped right in. But I think for a lot of people, we just did the best in a short period of time, and I think we learned a lot about what we could do better. So we're working right now on how do we take attendance in a homeroom. We have an advisory at the beginning of most days at the elementary level. They do, you may have remembered like a morning meeting or a morning circle in grade school, and in middle school and high school, it's more like an advisory. So there's a way to connect real time. Teacher is in a call like we are now. I guess I could be watching TV while I was speaking to you, but it would be challenging. So teachers are keeping an eye on the kids that way. And then the last question you asked was, what if somebody's not able to supervise them? So, we've actually proposed a number of programs that go beyond just remote, and that's what the Remote Plus is about. We still have to finish our talks with the unions. It's not just teachers, it's not just paraprofessionals, it's also custodians and secretaries and food service and all those folks, transportation, a number of different groups. But what we're proposing is that if anyone doesn't have a family or a caregiver in the home that can supervise them, that we create a supervised remote learning site at the school. So at the middle school and the high school, we're calling this the STREAMS program, Supervised Technology and Remote Education at My School. And essentially, you can come and sit in our gymnasium. We have a desk, we have a laptop, you have a headphones, we have staff supervising, and you're still engaged in your remote learning program, but you're safe. There's a roof, there's somebody supervising you. And, we do understand that this is a challenge for families. So we're offering that program at the middle school and the high school level so that students can come take advantage of that. We're prioritizing students we think were most unsuccessful in the spring or have extenuating circumstances. And then we proposed a similar program at the elementary level called Elementary Essentials. If your parents are both essential workers and you don't have anybody providing care, how are you going to manage remote learning? So again, we've proposed that. We do need to complete our talks with the unions, make sure that we have enough staff to do that program. And we have to make sure the building's HVAC assessments come back. But we fully support the idea of making sure our students are safe and connected to learning.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions.
So if you don't mind, I've got a couple of questions also.
Please do.
I'll go one at a time though, because
Okay, great.
yeah.
Testing my memory. I can only count to 3, so Marshall got the max there.
So it sounds like we're planned up through November. I'm still optimistic that someday the COVID is going to end and we're all going to go back to normal, right?
As am I.
How often are we talking about reassessing these plans? Are you going to do it on a quarterly basis? Or are you going to do it kind of month by month? Do you even have any kind of framework like that in place right now?
So I do. We proposed and the school committee voted a phase plan, which has 4 phases: pre-planning phase, a remote phase, and then continues to add in each of these programs. In the meantime, the school committee is going to be voting every 2 weeks. So we met last week, we're meeting again next week, and that will serve as a natural sort of gatekeeping in moving into the phases. So they will have scheduled 2-week meetings. Everybody loves more meetings, right? And those will be built in so that as the situation progresses, maybe, everything is continuing to look really great in Franklin County as we phase into this program, and we'll be able to go fully back into an in-person mode. That would be the kind of a situation where you would want to have, regular assessment working with public health. On the other side, we've seen locally in Athol Royalston, there was published cases recently, and you can see that a small number of cases have to be worked diligently to contain and respond to, right? So there was a publication of that in the paper recently, how they're responding to a small outbreak there. So the meetings will be set up every 2 weeks. On our end, we're working on what does it look like for this if it's succeeding, and what does it look like if it's not working well, so we can continually adjust. We don't want to say, we're going to do this for the year. We want to be saying, at set intervals, we're updating and we're adjusting, so that if it's not working for families or teachers, that there's a rapid feedback. So our reopening team that served to come up with a lot of these plans is going to sort of morph into a monitoring team, so we can be collecting feedback and making rapid changes and adjusting it if for any reason it's not working. It has to work for families and teachers and students.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask my second question, then I'll recognize. So my second question, see, rank has its privileges. All right, so my second question, I wanted to know, I know a lot of, actually, I don't think any of our students got a GPA for spring semester last year. And I was wondering if that would be the case this fall, because I know I work at UMass, so I'm in higher ed. And when seniors graduate, it's important for them to have a GPA. They need to, be able to apply for college and things like that. And we have not, at UMass, we have not figured out how we're dealing with students without GPAs for a semester. Are the students going to get letter grades and be held to the same standard in the fall, or is it going to be is it going to be more like the spring?
So 2 requirements. 1, attendance will be taken. 2nd, it's graded. So in the spring, we had credit, no credit, which was challenging because we did have to calculate, but we had to sort of weight in the credit, no credit semester along with the previously graded semesters. And this coming year, it will be graded. And that is part of providing live instruction, frequent feedback, and we're investing in a lot of different platforms that help students make it more organized and more streamlined.
Thank you. Counselor Mayo? Doug, you're on mute.
Sorry. Superintendent, I have a question for you.
Go ahead, fire away.
You just talked about that you have the school committee, and you have a phased program depending on the severity of COVID and how it goes. Now the governor has a similar plan. Are you working like a hand in glove with the governor on that? Because he has a phased program, which he was going to go to the next phase, but then there was some cases of COVID happening in Massachusetts that basically said that he basically backed away from that, going to the next phase for restaurants.
So that's a great question. I think people have gotten used to the idea of a phase plan, right? If everything's going on in phase 1, we move to phase 2 and so forth. And you may move forward and back depending on how things go. So, there's been new data released on how to sort of distill the data of COVID cases to this color-coded map. You may have seen this as sort of like a traffic light. So that's one very important point of data, and we want to work with our Board of Health and medical professionals to make sure we're keeping an eye on that. But it's not the only point of data. So as an example, if we had no COVID at all in Greenfield, but we also, for whatever reason, had no available teachers. I'm just using a silly example. But if all of the teachers, I don't know, let's say they had no childcare because of the school situation themselves, and they couldn't report in person, that would be a factor. So staffing is a factor, and financial resources to ensure that we're delivering along these safety requirements. For example, you can only put 1/3 of the number of students on buses. So those considerations are also there. So we're moving through the phases, but it's not strictly based on COVID. It's based on COVID plus resources plus the facilities assessment. I hope that's clear.
Yes, it is very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions? And I can open this up to members of the public if you're okay with that, Jordana. Are there any members of the public that have questions for the school superintendent? All right. I guess we get to cut you loose. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.
All right. Always a pleasure. All right. Next, I know we have Chief Haig. Next is communications from department heads, but I think, Chief, you're probably here for the other conversation. So maybe, I don't know if you have something separate to say. No? Do we have any other department heads on the line? All right. So let's go ahead and we'll move in. This is police brutality and race relations affecting City of Greenfield. And this is more of an open-ended discussion. So I don't want to put you on the spot, Chief. If you want to get started, you can. If not, we can open it up to if someone else would like to get started. I think we had some.
I guess I could probably answer any questions first and then address whatever I need to towards the end if you want.
Yeah, that sounds good. So why don't I go ahead and frame this? And so I'm seeing these as two separate pieces. They're definitely interrelated. So police brutality can happen with, a white cop and a white perpetrator, correct? It can also happen with, the race of cop is not necessarily the only factor in police brutality. It's become a big issue in the media because there have been patterns throughout the country where we're seeing that people of color are being targeted more frequently and are having a harder time pursuing the same avenues through the justice system that white people are having. And I know this is a difficult conversation. So if anyone feels offended by anything that I say, if I use a wrong word, please let me know and I'll try and correct it. I'm not trying to be insensitive, but I've got thick skin. So I often will sort of speak without sugarcoating things.
Well, I can just address a couple of things up front for you if you want, based on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, one of the concerns I had is I did listen to one of your prior meetings, and I believe the ACLU report was referred to and talked about that we were arresting or charging persons of color at a higher rate for possession of marijuana and things of that nature. And that's highly inaccurate of Greenfield. We did a 10-year look back on that, and we've had two times that there's been a summons, not even arrest, for possession of marijuana, and it was a secondary charge, one that was done in a search warrant for distribution of much heavier narcotics, and that was done in joint with the task force, and the other was a individual who brought a Class A substance onto the school grounds, and again, it was a secondary charge of possession of marijuana. Again, no arrest made in either case, and there were summonses, and that's going back on a 10-year mark. We also did the same time frame because these are the public records that we've gotten where we're arresting 90% white here in Greenfield, which is indicative of our population. Of the 10%, we had to do it by hand because it's very hard, but to look back, of the 10%, about 40% of that number of non-white is not from Greenfield. So that also is indicative of our community. So we have looked at that. I'm not saying that there aren't issues to look at and things that we can do better and things that we can work harder together on. But I did take it slightly personal when that was brought up and the way it was was angled, because we've worked really hard to be pretty transparent with our policing over the last many years since I've been here, including getting accredited with the best practices, and that we are constantly in review for best practices. So I understand that there are concerns and there are issues and there are bad interactions in all walks of life, and I'm not blind to that. But I think an overall blanket of that we're just kind of like everybody else in the country and we're going that direction. I guess myself, on behalf of my department, I took it personally.
Oh, no, and Chief, I don't want you to take any of this personally. I think we're trying to do our due diligence. We want to make sure that this is not going to be a problem in Greenfield. And, this is going to be a larger conversation. I don't think this is something that we're going to solve in a meeting that hopefully is going to end at some point so that we can all have dinner. But very quickly, before we move on, could you tell me what is a Class A substance? I don't think I understand the difference.
Heroin, opioids, that type of drug. A lot of the pills, particular pills, that kind of thing, prescription meds of certain kinds.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's going to happen is when people start talking about these statistics, it's really difficult to find statistics specifically on a community. I think they're going to be looking at national statistics, and maybe we're different and maybe we're not. But I think that what we would like to do in the best interest of the entire city is, we can be better than the rest of the country. And I think that that's something to strive for. So
we maintain the statistics and I provide them whenever asked.
I'm sorry, you cut out. Well,
we maintain those type of statistics, and those can be provided when anyone asks. That's why we've been looking at this for some time now.
Right. I'm not saying that you don't provide the statistics. I'm saying that sometimes when people are interested in a topic and they go and do research, I think the first place you start is a web browser. And there are some legitimate federal sources of information, but they're going to be national or maybe statewide, but they're not going to drill all the way down to Greenfield. But I think that's the purpose of this meeting, is we can start talking about what's going on in Greenfield, what are we doing right, what can be improved upon. And I think also bringing in the transparency piece is going to be a big step forward.
I guess I'm confused. I don't know what we're not transparent about, but I'll listen.
No, I'm not saying that you're not transparent. What I'm saying is when we had that meeting, and it was the month before last, I believe, where somebody started talking about marijuana statistics, that was something that I kind of glommed onto, because I was talking about, I have family members who are police officers, and I know that they did not become police officers because they wanted to go harass teenagers over smoking pot. They became police officers because they wanted to, make their community safe. And I think that that's the goal of most police officers. If you get into this line of work where it's very dangerous, we want to, make our communities better. So I'm not saying that you're not transparent. What I'm saying is I think that when people start looking at these topics, there's information that's out there that may not be specific to Greenfield. So by bringing this out and saying, hey, this is what's going on in Greenfield, it gets us started so we can have that conversation. So is there anybody else who wants to weigh in on this? All right, Councilor Mayo.
Hi, this is a question for Chief Hay. Chief Hay, I've heard you say at council meetings that, for instance, a good example of this is when the campers were at on the common, and you basically were saying that you didn't have the resources to kind of constantly deal with that kind of situation, and sometimes sometimes it was getting out of control, not by you or your officers, but by sometimes the people that were living there were causing problems, and that you yourself were saying that you just don't have the manpower to do that. Now, there are other resources in town that might be able to help you out. And without seeing a person with a gun come toward you and see if they could deal with it that way. There are Greenfield is known for its social service programs, and they might be able to help in situations like what happened on the campground or on the common, or even in the railroad tracks, or something like that. Something that takes away from what your officers should be doing, and don't have the time for that.
I guess I didn't really hear a question, Counselor. I mean, we got to get away from thinking we're walking down the streets with guns blazing here. This to me is like one of the problems that we're talking about as well. We're the first responders for primarily everything that happens here in Greenfield. I would love to tell you that right now I could just call up any social service and say, you know what, we're not responding. You need to do that, but you know what's not going to happen? There's not going to be a response. We can't tell private entities what to do. We can talk with them, try to work with them, which we do. It's part of the CIT model. If we want to throw the critical incident training right out the window, everything that we've been asked to do over the last several years, that we've worked really hard to, that we've gotten grants for, which is to push us towards being more like social workers, we're putting a premium on that type of education. When we're looking at new hires, psychology, a sociology degree, type of more of a civilian degree, I guess we'll call it, away from criminal justice. We're looking at all that. But, we've been asked to do this type of work for years now, and now we are now being asked to not do it. And my question to everybody else is, who's going to do it? We can't tell somebody else to do it. I mean, we don't walk down the street with our hand on our gun when we walk up to somebody. That's not normal. That's not a normal action for us. That's not how we're taught. We're almost taught so far the other direction. That it can be an officer safety issue.
I'm not saying that at all. I mean, but you yourself have said that you're undermanned.
Well, you're taking a blanket statement or a very specific part of my statement away from me. I didn't blanket and say we're undermanned for everything. But when we deal with social service agencies, you're right. We are undermanned. If we're going to do just social service across the board, you're absolutely right. We don't have enough people to do that. We don't have enough folks that can do that. But we are still the ones that are going to respond there first, in hopes that we have somebody to call that can take over for us. But I can tell you, just having multiple conversations with social work agencies, as well as other groups here in Greenfield that are fantastic to us and help us with a lot of different things. But we're still the ones that respond there first. So they're not going to respond there first.
It's not only to assess the situation, and maybe make a phone call after assessing the situation.
That's what we do now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I misunderstood.
Chief, can you explain? You said something about a CIT model. I know not everyone on the call is well, I don't think there are very many people on the call who are police officers.
That's fine.
And I know jargon just gets to be part of the, it becomes part of your vernacular. But if you could explain what that is.
So the CIT is the critical incident training. It's been around a while. There's not that many in Western Mass that have their department as kind of across the board almost trained in it. There's different levels. There's the basic level that we send officers to. I think we're probably around 75%, maybe a little bit more of our officer base has gone to it. It's used for de-escalation. It's used for recognition of situations where, arrests and, police action is not necessarily in traditional police action, we'll call it. I mean, we still have to respond and be social workers 90% of our job. But it teaches you tools to do different types of assessments, de-escalation. Who should we actually call to help the folks that we're dealing with, whether it's the person that's actually in crisis at the time, whether it's the family that we're about to either leave these individuals with that we've dealt with, or are we taking them to the hospital? Are we calling an ambulance? Are we then putting the families in touch with somebody after? That's part of what the training is, to assess the situation and try to remove us. But part of it, and this is what the CIT model has been made of, is originally, and now I got to be honest with you, I'm kind of doubting why we're going to continue with another level of it, was to stay in contact with the families so that people felt more comfortable with police officers, that we're there to follow up the day after, a couple days later, say, hey, how are things going? Do you need any other assistance? That's part of that CIT model. There's a level after that initial reaction, and it's that follow-up piece. And maybe it's not appropriate for us to be there, but maybe it is. Maybe these families would like to hear from the person that just dealt, and show that we're actually involved in the community and care about what the next level care is for the individuals that are in crisis. And if we're not warranted after that, okay, then we bring in the pieces of the CIT model that are appropriate. We've tried to get together with some of our social service agencies. They're short on personnel as well. So, I mean, we've wanted people to be in our cruisers with us at times. We've wanted to be able to pick up the phone and make a phone call. Myself and Sheriff Donnellan are talking about a multitude of different things, but now it looks like maybe that's not what the community wants from us. I don't know. I would think that was the community policing model that we worked on for so many years, that the money got taken away and sucked out of the police department and moved somewhere else within the state, which is fine, but they didn't expect us to stop being community police officers. Now it sounds like that's the model we should be using, but I'm not hearing that's a good idea right now. It's unfortunate.
All right, so Councillor Ricketts had a question next.
Okay, thank you. I'm very sorry for being late. I got out of the doctor's appointment very late. Okay, so I just wanted to back up for a moment and talk about again the number of arrests made for things like marijuana. And Chief Haig, good evening, and thank you for being at the meeting, stated that it wasn't really Greenfield. And I feel like I wish there was a way that that report was broken down so that we could see if it was other towns or state police. Because I know if someone lives in Greenfield, they could be stopped in any of the towns surrounding us, or they could even be stopped in Greenfield, and it could be the state police. So it could be high on account of them. And I don't know if there's a way for us to figure that out, but I think that's an important piece to know.
Yeah, I can address that for you, Counselor. I was in touch right after this got kind of published and then brought up. I got a call from the district attorney's office as well, and they were like me, kind of stunned by this and wanted to know, like, okay, who's actually producing these numbers that would put this type of report to say Franklin County and Greenfield is this, a massive problem in the country for these particular charges of the possession. And the only one that they had as well with that particular just straight up kind of charge was the one that I referred to earlier. So at least in the district attorney's office, which represents our task force, they didn't have any other numbers either. So we came up with the same numbers for the same time frame. I can't tell you about the rest of the state because county to county is different. I can just tell you from our district attorney's office, they were as shocked as me by that report and that number, because we couldn't figure out that charge. I mean, especially in that time frame too. You're talking about charging for marijuana possession. I mean, we've legalized it, we decriminalized it, we've pretty much pushed away on that type of a charge for a very long time because we didn't want to charge people unnecessarily for something that, quite honestly, wasn't on our opioid and heroin radar, because that's what we've been dealing with for the last bunch of years. And before that, it was much heavier drugs than marijuana. So it hadn't been happening. So, distribution's different. We're talking about possession here. And that's what the report was, possession. We're still going after, the people that are dealing, because the people that are dealing are the problem. You know, we don't want our youth being dealt to, and it doesn't matter what it is, you know. So the distribution part of it is different, and people, I think, have to understand that there's a difference between distribution and possession. Because possession's a misdemeanor of Class D, or was. Obviously, we don't deal with that anymore, but distribution is distribution, and that's a felony.
Okay, next I have Rachel Dowd.
Hi there. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to say that there's been a pattern of a certain amount of like burying our heads in the sand. This is an issue in Greenfield. The conversation surrounding race and police brutality in Greenfield, frankly, I'm finding it very offensive. Multiple people of color have stood up outside of the police station and on the town common. They've said they feel targeted and unsafe by law enforcement in Greenfield. And they've said that not only do they not want community policing, they want less of a present police force in Greenfield, and they want the money to be diverted to actual social service agencies that will help people. And then in turn, I'm seeing that we're solving that by having more community policing, having conversations about how the police can get more involved. That's not what people are wanting. And I just find that offensive that these requests are being ignored and people continue to speak out against this. People of color are risking their safety to speak against this. Another thing I also wanted to say too is we were talking about how before it was commented that the police department in Greenfield is very transparent, and I find that to be very false. I have been looking at police reports for the last year or so, and I was able to get the press logs, and I was able to get the full narratives previously. And about a month ago or so, all of the information in the logs was redacted, and I was unable to get that, and I was not told why that is. So that to me is a lack of transparency. That's supposed to be public information, and the public is not able to actually see what the police is doing. Thank you.
So, Chief, I think that brings up if we do have accusations of police brutality in town, how are those reported and how are they handled?
We have we have a policy that anything that's reported, we follow up on. And it's a specific policy. That's made public as well. It's based on the accreditation model. It's been vetted, and there's specific steps that have to be done. I'm not saying that there isn't a discussion to be had. I think that's the wrong way to twist my words on me. That's not what I'm saying at all. I do think what's that? I'm sorry. So there is an online reporting policy for any officer complaint. We've also started tracking officer complaints different. We added a whole new section into our system so we can be very specific when people ask officer complaints. We now have that as a completely separate. We have to do a lot of checking, but we do them. So I think that there's definitely a conversation to be had. I'm all for having the conversation for sure. And we're trying to put more out there as far as how to report it, what to be expected when it's reported. That's all in our policy. Timelines are in our policy. Okay. I'm not sure about the whole can't get our log right now. I'll absolutely look into that because we haven't changed how we've done that at all. So I'm not sure what piece that is. Anything that is public goes there. It's been a little different since COVID because people used to walk in and we had our log right there and people could just read it. I don't know exactly how that has changed as far as how Ms. Dowd was referring to, but I'll be more than happy to look into it because it shouldn't have changed as far as the information that goes out.
Thank you. It did abruptly change, and I would really love to see that. I'd be happy to call again and try to get that information, but it's certainly changed. All of the information was redacted from the entire log, and that was not previously the case.
All right, do me a favor, and could you please email me, and I'll have my deputy chief look into it ASAP?
Sure thing. Thank you so much.
Chief, could you walk me through the steps? If I feel like if I got arrested and I feel like somebody was had roughed me up during the process, like what would I do? What would be my recourse, and what does it look like? What would I do? What would be my recourse?
I mean, there's a formal process that can be filled out, like a complaint form, which can be done online or in person. We don't require, as much as we do like to have it in writing, because as we know, there's also accusations and allegations that can be, fraudulent. But there are certainly some that people feel are legitimate. We have to look into those. So we look into them regardless if they're in writing or verbal. And then it's assigned to a, based on, I mean, it's hard to say because it's based on what the complaint is. And then you decide how it's assigned. Is it internally, or is it assigned to an outside agency to look into? That is based on what the allegation is, who the allegation's about, whether we're looking at, policy violation, whether we're looking at a criminal violation, so you have to basically assign that per situation. And that is defined in the policy. And then there's a manner in which you need to keep the person who has filed that up to date, what we can put out there. There's certainly things that are public and some things that aren't. There's things at the end of those investigations that may or may not be completely public record. So you got to be careful with that.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to move on. Our next person who's asked to speak is Susan Wargaftic.
Just so we also have the Public Safety Commission, that you can always file a complaint directly to the Public Safety Commission. And if anything goes to the mayor's office, they obviously are the top of the city, and we have to look into anything that goes there as well. And if those complaints are about particular ranking officers, they go to the Public Safety Commission for investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Chief Haig, one of the things that you were speaking of was the training that the police officers get. And one of the things that strikes me is that if we look at a somewhat different kind of model of public safety, where we are considering having social workers as part of a public safety approach, where perhaps they are part of the dispatch process, and therefore they are included within a public safety milieu, rather than simply having police, and the police go and do work that social workers might be more appropriate to do. Is that a model that you would see yourself being connected to in any way?
We started talking about this 3 years ago.
Okay.
We actually wanted, and I brought this up, and I have a lot of conversations at home. My wife is a social worker. So we have lots of conversations about this, and she supervises social workers and in the justice system. So yeah, this was something we talked about 3 years ago. We would love to have social workers on staff. One of the things I brought up that kind of can create a barrier is that if they aren't Greenfield employees, if they're not our folks, if they work for private agencies, it's really hard to tell a private agency how they're going to act. But yeah, if we could have somebody, I mean, now I've got to be honest with you, if it's a situation that needs to require some type of safety situation, some type of, you got to secure a situation, you don't want to send somebody in who's not prepared. I've heard people say, well, we need to send social workers to domestic assaults. Those are the most dangerous calls we go on. I would feel really uncomfortable. I don't like sending officers to those type of scenarios. I don't think there's any social work agency that would want to walk in the door before us. So we do have to have that kind of dual purpose. But when a situation is secure and it's more appropriate for a social worker to be there instead of us, absolutely. I don't think you'd have an argument from any officer on that.
So if, for instance, there were different protocols set up, so for instance, if there were a domestic violence concern, that perhaps it's a social worker on your staff and an officer going together. If it's some of the, looking at the incident reports, some of the things have been clearly someone who is not stable, but who is not dangerous either. That could be a social worker, period.
I would caution you on that. Our job is so volatile. I can't tell you that a call coming into a dispatcher, that the dispatcher is going to be able to say, this doesn't require a police officer. It only requires a social worker. We can't ask that of them. We don't know. Many calls that come in, they're not what the call is, and that's a concern. So when I say
Okay.
safety, it's we get there, we assess. Yeah, it could be somebody that's really just in a crisis situation that doesn't really require a police officer. And sometimes people call us, and it really isn't a police matter, but we still have to look into it because it could be.
And so I totally understand the question, and it's obviously much more complex than I know sitting here. I guess part of what I'm asking is, would you be willing to work with community people to see if protocols could be set up and where we could support having social workers as part of the team and making sure that the budget reflected that?
I can just tell you, as the Greenfield Police, we're all on board for having social workers as part of the team.
Okay.
I am. My deputy chief is heavily interested and has been for many years in the mental health world, because that is typically involved in a lot of the cases and calls that we go on. So yes, we absolutely are open to that conversation, and we started it a long time ago, and I would love to see something like that happen here in Greenfield. I'd like to be a model for the state that we pulled it off before everybody else.
That would
That's
be
a great model.
Let's sit down and talk about that.
Sounds great.
All right, next I had Counselor Ricketts and then Counselor Mayo afterwards. Okay, it looks like from the little window at the bottom of my screen, it looks like Counselor Ricketts might be. Oh, are you here? All right, take it away, Penny. Oh, are you here? All right, take it away, Penny.
Whoops. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Turn the volume up.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry I was late to this meeting, and so I'm not sure how it started, but I know that we have had forums like this for many departments for different issues, and so I'm hoping that because I did hear a few things come out tonight since I've been listening, like one was about why was the police log, was it redacted, and why was that happening, and how we handle as counselors when we're talking to department heads, when we're talking to different departments, is we try to gather as many questions ahead of time so that it can come back to us in more report form. And I really like that. I just don't want, like bombs thrown out there or anything, because it's just too on the spot. And it's what we're all looking for is answers and to be on the same page. Because I think a number one thing I brought up in 2 or 3 council meetings ago was that we have a public safety commission. And I'm so glad that Chief Haig brought that up again tonight, because a previous caller had spoken about how so many people on the common and people that she was in contact with have had complaints or really fearful or whatnot. I think that's really important information for the Public Safety Commission. So I'm just hoping that through all of this, that we find out that there is a process. And if none of us are using it, things like tonight aren't as helpful as some people may think, because we're not getting direct information. We don't have anything historical to look back on. I can't say right now that I have heard that 23 people have complained, or there's been this many complaints against a certain officer, or the Public Safety Commission and the Human Rights met together and spoke about X, Y, and Z incidents. I think those are all very important, because it's what we want to know about Greenfield. So I just want to say, from this moment forward, I hope we're going to be moving in a direction where we really do want to find some common ground. We do want to get all this information to the right people, and we want to know a good process so that it's something that is tangible, something we can look at. Because when we look at this nationwide and we see an incident coming and they go to that officer's jacket and they see numerous abuse of power, then that's something we can hang our hat on as a nation. So when I think about my community, it's no different. So the only way we can do that is if we're following some kind of process, we're putting in those complaints, we're going to the public safety meetings, we're not throwing things out in a forum where there's no way to do anything about this right now except for to say, okay, can you do some follow-up and get back to us? But personally, as a counselor, I want to know from some of the people on the call or some people that want to speak later about some of those specific incidents, because it is important to me. And it's something that I can, as a counselor, would go to a public safety meeting and listen with some other residents if they felt some fear. But I just want to know that that's what people want to do. The forum part, this is too easy, and this is not this isn't helping to solve a problem. It's things that we've heard for the last 3 or 4 months. So I'd like to work more on the process.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Mayo, then Councillor Jarvis, and then I'm going to go again. Doug? Is Doug still on the line?
Hi, Chief.
I can hear you now, sir.
So anyway, you had you spoke a little while ago when we talked about if a complaint was made against an officer, and you said there are two ways to kind of look at it, internally or an outside agency. Can you describe for us what that outside agency is? Is it
Sure.
part of the force, or is it part of the state? Part of what agency are we talking about?
All the above. So it really depends. You can use an outside agency such as the state police, and they probably would send it more than likely if it was something where we're looking at criminal activity type of thing. They would have an investigative team that's independent, obviously,
Okay.
that we don't work with on a regular basis do it.
Okay.
You can hire a private agency, there's a few out there that you can hire for independent investigations, and that can be internal as well. So if you have a complicated internal investigation where you really want to make sure that it involves a lot of layers, it may involve multiple layers of supervision as well. You may be inclined to do that. It's highly expensive, but it can be worth it because it can keep things independent, very independent. Now, there's other things that are on a level where a immediate supervisor could handle it. Another layer, such as a lieutenant or a deputy chief, can handle it. In regard to me personally, we try to keep things, when it gets to me, more of a kind of a decision making, brought to me, advisory type of a thing as we go, because I'm the one that's going to make that call, more than likely to move it to an outside agency.
Right.
So I get kept apprised of how these investigations are going.
Okay.
So it really depends on what level it comes in at, and what level I mean by patrol, sergeant, lieutenant, deputy chief.
Yep.
And then you make the determination whether or not this can be appropriately investigated internally by a level of supervision that's higher than obviously that of the one that committed it. And that could mean that a lieutenant's investigating a patrol, or my deputy chief's investigating a patrol, or we can go to an outside agency such as a private investigative firm that specializes in police work, and then you're obviously paying for an outside agency to come in, and it's the same rules under our policy as if it were internal. So they take our policy and they use our policy to make sure there's no policy violations with regard to an investigation.
Got it.
And then there's obviously the state police, the district attorney's office, not necessarily state police, but the state police that work for the district attorney's office.
Okay. All right.
That would do an investigation if we so choose.
Perfect. You answered it perfect. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Ed, you're up.
I'm up, huh? Evening, Chief. How are you? Hey, just a couple things. I would like to say and reflect that I think the Greenfield Police Department does an outstanding job, having worked with them for 30 years as a first responder. And I can tell you at times I was glad that they were there with us for some of these calls that we go on to that are domestic or maybe have some underlying issues. As you know, and you agree with me that sometimes at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning, it's very hard to get professional help when you need it.
Yes, usually the hardest time.
Sometimes we need the professional help, but the citizens, as citizens, sometimes it's very hard to get them the help that they need. There's certain criteria that need to be made and met to get these people their help that they need. And sometimes it can be frustration both on our part and on the police officers' part that we can't get these people the help that they need. And I'm sure you've heard this before. So I just want to get that out there to people so they understand that sometimes it's pretty hard to get the people the help that they need. It's just not a flick of a switch. There's a lot of protocols that need to be met to get these people their help. And for one, I don't know if I want to be a social worker showing up at a door before, because I've seen some pretty nasty situations that I was glad that there was a police officer there to handle. So for one, I'd like to back your department and say that I think you guys do an outstanding job. I do think that there's some need for open communications, some education that needs to be done both on the police department's side of understanding where the public is coming from and the public's need of education also. So I'm glad that there's going to be some open discussions and some understanding on both parties. And I think you guys are doing an outstanding job. I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you, Counselor. And Counselor, you brought up a really good point about the well-being of the officers, as well as obviously in your former line of work as well, where we don't ignore that as well. I mean, right now, I have to be honest with you, I'd be lying if I didn't say that the officers weren't deeply affected by the way that they're being vocally perceived. And I know that there's certainly justification for some of that. But I can just tell you locally, our folks are they're part of the community. They're human. I don't think you're going to get any resistance to communication or willingness to listen. And we all need to constantly be prepared to change and willing to adjust when those adjustments are needed. And I don't think you're ever going to have folks here say that, yeah, we're perfect and nothing ever should be talked about, because I just don't believe that. And I think that, we want to, and I mean myself, be part of this community and move forward in a positive direction from yesterday to whenever, I'm done here and hopefully on beyond. We are bringing in a new generation of police officers that this open communication is going to be all they've known, and that's and I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. And the generation like myself that have been around for a long time. We need to recognize that as well. But I do think we have a lot of open thinkers here that want to and are eager to listen and educate themselves on many things, and I think that that's a good thing. There is an eagerness that's here. I can tell you that. They want to be part of the community. They want to be looked at as a valuable part of this community. And I don't think I would hire somebody that I was worried didn't have those values. So thank you.
All right, so I'm ready to wrap up this section unless somebody else has something they want to mention. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of offer my closing thoughts and then move on through our agenda. Norm, are you raising your hand? Go ahead, Norm.
Yes. When I first came on the council many years ago, a number of people came to me without any prompting, and they raised issues about people driving while black. Specifically, one of the nurses who was leaving her position at 11 o'clock at night and being stopped 3 or 4 times, and other nurses leaving the same shift were never stopped. Um, and to me, it's a waste of resources when we have very few um police on the job. Um, and the other question is, I know I've heard you speak, Chief Haig, about the difficulty in recruiting new police officers. When you first came on the force, I think you said that there were like 40 applicants for maybe 4 jobs, and now there's maybe 4 for 1 job. So it's a different environment that you find yourself in.
Sure, I can address as far as the first piece. I obviously probably can't address that right now because I don't know the circumstances surrounding or who the person is, and obviously if that were something that were reported to us, we would have to look into it, and we would look into it, and we'd do it thoroughly. In regard to the second part of recruitment, yeah, I mean, I think one, it's a tough profession anyway, and it's an honorable profession. I do believe that. I've been doing this now since I got hired as a 22-year-old college senior, and I've been doing it since. And I recently turned 45, so I've been chief for a lot of my career between here and Orange, and I've seen transitions in the process. I mean, civil service. You've heard me speak about it a lot. I don't think there's really a place for it anymore in Greenfield. I think it really doesn't allow us to have a pool of candidates that will more validly represent our community. I've said that for years, probably ever since I got here. You've probably been hearing it, and I can't wait till it makes it to the governor's desk here and gets signed off so we can officially be done and over with. I can tell you that without civil service, we've had, as soon as it was read in the paper, essentially that it was voted out, and this is going back to pretty much last June, we've had a consistent amount of people saying, when are you finally going to be out? Because I want to come work in Greenfield. And as you saw, we're actively recruiting now with the understanding we will be out as soon as we're signed off on it. And we're actively, openly recruiting from a wider span of candidates that can help us more accurately and more appropriately represent our community. And that's a good thing. And I think that will help going forward, especially because if you're looking at a civil service list right now in Greenfield, there's just very few names on it. And I know those very few names could be very good, but that's the only option that we had at that point. I'm looking forward to finally having a process that's more widespread. And quite honestly, I think people want to come work here. We have, we've worked really hard on our reputation, and we've worked really hard to bring a level of professionalism through accreditation that the officers here are proud of. It was a process, and I have to say, from our department, they didn't fight us on this. They didn't fight me on this. This was something, when I came here, I had told Mayor Martin there was a few things I wanted to see done. I wanted to see us more appropriately staffed for what I had come into. I wanted to see our equipment get to where it needed to be. I wanted to see civil service go away. I wanted to get rid of these temporary and acting positions, which obviously we're in a little bit of a transition right now, but that happens. And I wanted to see us get accredited. And that is difficult, and it's difficult to maintain, because what it does is it makes us be accountable for what we're doing. We have to prove it all the time. It's something the community should really be proud of, that we are one of the few, and this is not an easy task. This is something that if you're looking at the proposed changes in the legislation that they want all police departments to be accredited. That's part of what they're looking at. Good luck. It's hard, and we're proud of it, and we're going to keep doing it. And I didn't have officers fighting it. I didn't have officers fight defibs or Narcan to save lives. They didn't fight that. They were like, this is part of our job to save people's lives. They went right for it. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of those people within our department that continue to say, okay, chief, which direction are we going to go? I'm also proud of the ones that come in and say to me all the time, I think we could do this better, or I think this would be really great for our community. That's what makes me proud as a chief. And that's what I want to do for the community. So the more open communication we can have with the community and with our officers and have a better relationship, better than even, I think we have, even better, then that's what we need to do. We need to hear from segments of the community that feel that maybe we are lacking in this particular area. Maybe we are, maybe we're not, but if we are, how do we fix it? Can we work together to fix it? And if we're not and we're doing something, how do we communicate better that we're doing this and we're here for that? That's part of the open communication that I've been about since I've been here. Thank you.
I just one other question. I know the fire department has a policy that when a fire person gets involved in a situation where it's very traumatic, and I've seen this with being stopped by a state police in New Hampshire, where the officer was really traumatized, and yet she was still pulling me over. She couldn't really handle the situation. And I wondered if there's a timeout, if an officer gets into a situation where it's very traumatic, that there is a timeout so that they can regroup themselves and be able to do their job much more professionally without being stressed to the max.
Great question. And it's something that we focus on routinely. We try to pay attention as much as possible. There's obviously situations that just dictate we're bringing in support immediately, much like Councillor Jarvis mentioned. Like, this is something that we would do kind of routinely in known traumatic events right off the bat. We've also had and we encourage officers themselves to self-report when they're feeling a certain way, when they've dealt with certain situations. We also have supervisors, and again, it's part of their training, to speak up, to recognize, to say, hey, I think this person might need some assistance, and that happens more than you realize, and it's something that we're very cognizant of, and we're trying to break down that stigma just like everybody else is asking for us to break down in the community. We're a forgotten breed, and we do it to ourselves. Believe me, we're our own worst enemy when it comes to this, and I'm sure Councillor Jarvis will say the same thing. We tend to be the ones that bottle ourselves down because we're just supposed to do it. Okay, I mean, I throughout my career, I can't tell you how many things I've seen that I'm never going to speak about, and I've done so that other officers, especially when I was in Orange, when you didn't have multiple people on a shift. So when you worked your 4 days on, 2 days off, you tended to get it all. There was, there was shorthandedness. I saw a lot of things. You're probably not going to hear from me on a lot of them, but I understand them. And I'm one that if an officer comes to me and needs some assistance, I'm getting the assistance for him. We don't have to have a discussion as to why. I'm not going to sit down and ask him, give me a report as to why you think you need this. That way is done and over with. That can't happen. But we are a somewhat forgotten breed. It's part of our training and in service every year to try to recognize that suicides and police officers are going up. First responder suicides going up, has been for the last several years. We look at traumatic events that what caused somebody 10 years after they've had a career of not a single complaint on them to snap and do something. What did we miss along the way? That's what we have to look at on our end better. We have to recognize those signs. That's something that we have to continue to work on in our field. It's very important. I brought this up before. There's a concern out there about how and why something happens and who missed it at the end of the day. And you know what? It falls on me at the end of the day, right? Anything that happens in this place, it's my responsibility ultimately. So what do I do to help my officers and my supervisors and my dispatchers who, you know, tend to be forgotten a little bit? We try not to forget them because they're usually the ones on the other end of the phone listening to the worst of the worst. How do we make sure that those folks get the help they need right away so that it isn't a bottled up situation that comes to a head 2 days from then or 2 years or 20 years from then? So yes, it's a constant concern.
Thank you.
All right, last call if anybody wants to weigh in on this topic. All right, I'm not seeing anybody. So Chief, thank you for coming. So public comment, I know Councilor Ricketts mentioned earlier that normally when you hear from councilors, you get it in advance, so you have a chance to, you know, check your reports and you can come to us prepared. Obviously, public comment, you know, we're not going to hold citizens to, you know, and residents to the same sort of criteria. People are allowed to say, you know, whatever happens to be on their mind. And I don't want to stop that at this meeting because I think I like the back and forth, and I think that we had a pretty good conversation. I do want to continue this conversation. I think that there's a lot more to be said. I think there's a lot more to be explored. I'm glad that everybody was really respectful about this. I also want to acknowledge some of the things that we brought up. We did not go in depth about all of them. There are issues driving while black. It's something that, you know, statistics bear out. I don't know if these statistics are specific to Greenfield, but it's a pattern that we can't deny. So maybe we can delve more into some of these things where, you know, who gets stopped, why do they get stopped? And Chief, I don't want you to feel like you're on the hot seat, but you're the person who has answers for us. And I'm really, really glad that you want to be transparent with the community. I think sometimes when the community is looking for transparency, I think that community members are not necessarily looking for information in the places where city officials advertise that information. So having this conversation, I think, is going to bring us a little bit closer together on that point. And I do want to talk a little bit more about some of these issues later. We're going to bring it up to the full council. I believe that the public hearing, we were talking about having the public forum. My understanding is that that effort has mostly been derailed. So I don't think that that's going to happen. I could be wrong. It's okay if I'm wrong. You know, don't hold me to it. Are you okay, Penny?
Yes, something fell.
Okay. We want to make sure everybody's safe during these meetings, okay, guys? All right. So we can have this. We can talk more about this later. And then, Chief, if you have other topics that you would like to bring up, I know that we threw a lot of information at you tonight. I know one of the things that I had talked about was how do we handle complaints from, you know, for specific events, and it seems like there's more than one way to handle these things. So maybe next time we can talk about, okay, if someone gets arrested and they skin their knees and file a complaint, that falls under this. If someone else gets arrested and they're like pushed into the bushes and, you know, they get their head bashed, then that's how this complaint goes. And if someone else, you know, has to go to the hospital, we can talk about the different scenarios and how these things are handled, just so that city councilors have a better understanding of like at what level these different things are handled. Because I mean, we're not police officers and we don't necessarily know this.
No, but I'd love to just say again, we have a policy that dictates all of this. I would have no problem discussing it because it's good for you to know the policies, and then we can discuss if there's portions of those policies that aren't understood, because maybe we could clear those up. But I would urge you to read those policies based on that. People
Good idea.
get their head hit or whatever. No. We have to do use of force stuff. So I would urge, just if we want to have a conversation, I'd love you just to look at it and then we can have a discussion about it.
Right. No, Chief, I think that I have like two separate standards that I'm holding here. I can go read your policies because it's my responsibility as a city councilor and as the chair of this meeting. I should know what's going on and I should read these policies. But if a resident calls me and says, hey, I have a problem, I can't expect them to, they're not an elected official, and they're not a department head. I can't expect them to go, I'm not going to say, did you go onto the Greenfield website and did you look at the policy? So, I mean,
I agree with you. I wouldn't expect you to say that, but I would hope that you'd have a direction to push them. Like, say, yeah, go talk to the chief, go talk to the mayor, go talk to the public safety commission. Like, that's why I'm saying I get it. They're calling you, and then we talk about it like this, and the dialogue right now is great, but we're not attacking specifics about something that's already a policy. That's all. It's not enough. I'm just saying I'd like to have a discussion about the specifics in the policy so we can refer to it and say, okay, this isn't exactly working, or this is confusing, or this is why there's this issue with the public perception of the policy. That would be great to know, because then we can address those specific things with you as an elected official and the committee, as well as our public safety commission who reviews our policies.
Yes, and that's kind of what I would like to get into. And I do not want to broach the topic tonight because I know that we're all hungry. This meeting is almost over. I kind of have to go to the bathroom. So we're not going to get into it tonight, but I do have some specific things that I could mention to you as someone who is like a white woman in her 30s who keeps her nose clean and used to have a top secret security clearance. I've still had some little points of conflict. So I imagine that a person who does not have the same privilege that I have probably has it a lot worse. But we can talk about that another night. So I'm glad that we've kept this conversation open. I'm glad that we've kept this conversation very civil. And I want to keep it that way and keep this conversation going, because I think that the best thing that we can do is we can't worry about what's going on outside of Greenfield. We have to worry about what's happening here and what's happening in our community. And I want to believe that all of us have all of those best intentions at heart. So that's kind of my closing spiel. So, Chief, if you want to go eat dinner now, you can do that. And then I'll just hang out with my committee members. If I don't see anybody on the line who has a census update for us. So if someone has a motion or other business, or I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Great. Okay, our next meeting. Yep, so our next meeting will be September 21st. Same bat time, same bat channel. I think we're still going to be meeting remotely. So, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I will adjourn this meeting at 7:28 p.m. Have a wonderful